The morning of November 22nd, 1963, dawned clear and bright over Dallas, Texas. By 11 o'clock, the temperature had climbed to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. By noon, it reached 68. The sky stretched overhead in an unbroken expanse of blue, not a cloud visible anywhere. Weather records from Love Field Airport confirm it. Zero cloud cover, 0% chance of precipitation, winds from the northwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour. Perfect autumn weather. The kind of day when you leave your umbrella at home. Across Dallas, hundreds of thousands of people lined the streets waiting for President John F. Kennedy's motorcade. They crowded 10 deep on Main Street, pressed against barriers on Commerce Street, clustered on the sidewalks of Dealey Plaza. Men wore shirt sleeves or light jackets. Women wore dresses without coats. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders. Everyone squinted in the brilliant sunshine. Some shielded their eyes with their hands. Others wore sunglasses. A few held up newspapers or programs to block the glare. No one carried an umbrella, except one man. He stood on the north side of Elm Street, close to the curb, less than 30 feet from where the presidential limousine would pass. He was an adult male wearing dark clothing, and he held a large black umbrella, fully opened, raised above his head. At 12:30 p.m., as the motorcade turned from Houston Street onto Elm Street and began its descent toward the triple underpass, the man with the umbrella did something unusual. He raised the umbrella higher, then he pumped it, up and down. A deliberate motion, clearly visible to anyone watching. And in that moment, gunfire erupted. President Kennedy's hands flew to his throat. His wife, Jacqueline, turned toward him, confusion on her face. Then another shot. The president's head snapped forward and exploded in a spray of blood and tissue. Jackie screamed and tried to climb onto the trunk of the limousine. Secret Service agent Clint Hill sprinted forward and threw himself onto the back of the car. Governor John Connally, sitting in front of Kennedy, had been hit as well and slumped against his wife. The limousine accelerated toward Parkland Hospital. Behind it, Dealey Plaza descended into chaos. People screamed. Some dropped to the ground, covering their heads. Others ran toward the grassy knoll or the railroad yard, thinking shots had come from there. Police drew weapons and searched frantically for the shooter. Photographers clutched their cameras, trying to process what they had just witnessed. But the man with the umbrella remained calm. Photographs taken in the minutes after the shooting show him sitting on the curb next to another man, darker complexioned, who appears to be holding some kind of handheld device. The two sit together, not panicking, not running, simply observing the scene with what looks like professional detachment. Then, after several minutes, they stand and walk away in opposite directions. The man with the umbrella folds it closed and disappears into the crowd. For 15 years, no one knew who he was. The most famous piece of film footage in American history was shot by a 58-year-old dress manufacturer named Abraham Zapruder. Zapruder had brought his Bell & Howell Zoomatic 8mm camera to Dealey Plaza that day, climbing onto a concrete pedestal near the grassy knoll to get a better view. From that vantage point, he filmed the motorcade as it came down Elm Street. The Zapruder film runs for 26.6 seconds, capturing 486 individual frames. It shows President Kennedy waving to the crowd, then reacting to the first shot by raising his hands to his throat. It shows Governor Connally twisting in his seat, wounded. And in frame 313, it shows the moment a bullet strikes Kennedy's head, the impact so violent that a portion of his skull lifts away and blood sprays forward onto the windshield and motorcycle escorts. The film was immediately recognized as critical evidence. Life magazine purchased the rights within days and published selected frames. The Warren Commission studied it carefully. But it wasn't until years later, when researchers began examining the film frame by frame, that certain details came into focus. One of those details was the man with the umbrella. Josiah Thompson was one of the first to notice. Thompson, a philosophy professor turned private detective and assassination researcher, published a book in 1967 called 6 Seconds in Dallas. He had obtained high-quality copies of the Zapruder film and studied them obsessively, measuring angles, calculating trajectories, analyzing the president's movements, and he kept coming back to one inexplicable figure. "In all of Dallas," Thompson wrote, "there appears to be exactly one person standing under an open black umbrella. And that person is standing where the shots begin to rain into the limousine." Thompson wasn't alone in his fascination. Richard Sprague, a computer expert and conspiracy researcher, also focused on the Umbrella Man. Together, they developed a theory that would captivate assassination researchers for decades. The umbrella, they suggested, was a signal. The man opened it to tell shooters positioned in buildings around Dealey Plaza that the target was approaching. He pumped it to give the final go-ahead to fire. The theory made tactical sense. If you were coordinating a complex assassination with multiple shooters in different locations, you needed a way to communicate. Radio signals could be intercepted. Hand signals might not be visible from elevated positions. But an open umbrella on a sunny day, raised and pumped in a distinctive pattern, would be unmistakable. It could be seen from the Texas School Book Depository behind the motorcade, from the Daltex building across the street, from the grassy knoll to the president's right, from any elevated position around the plaza. Thompson and Sprague weren't fringe theorists. They presented their findings at academic conferences, published in reputable journals, corresponded with other serious researchers. The Umbrella Man became a fixture in assassination literature, one of the most compelling pieces of visual evidence that something beyond the official story had occurred in Dealey Plaza. But the theory took a darker turn in 1975. On September 16, 1975, the United States Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities, commonly known as the Church Committee after its chairman, Senator Frank Church of Idaho, held a hearing that would shock the nation. The committee had been investigating abuses by the CIA, FBI, and other intelligence agencies. What they revealed that day seemed like something from a spy novel. Charles Sensney took the witness stand. Sensney was a former Army officer who had worked as a contract weapons designer for the CIA. He had developed what he called special application devices at Fort Detrick, Maryland, the Army's biological warfare research facility. Under questioning, Sensney described a weapon the CIA had commissioned in the early 1960s. It was an umbrella that could fire a poison dart. The dart, Sensney explained, was made of plastic, shaped like a small feather, with tiny tail fins for stability. It measured roughly 1/4 of an inch long. It was propelled by a charge of solid-state fuel that could be ignited electronically. When fired, the dart could travel at high velocity, penetrate clothing, and embed itself in the target's skin, leaving only a small red mark, easily mistaken for an insect bite. The dart's payload was the critical element. It carried a toxin that, according to Sensney's testimony, would completely paralyze the victim within 2 seconds. After delivering its poison, the plastic dart would dissolve in the body, leaving no trace. The umbrella itself looked ordinary. The firing mechanism was hidden inside the shaft and handle. The assassin would hold the umbrella open, aim through the fabric where the pattern provided natural concealment, and trigger the device. Because the weapon was silent, no one in a crowd would hear it. The assassin could then simply fold the umbrella and walk away, indistinguishable from any other person seeking shade on a sunny day. Senator Church held up a similar umbrella during the hearing, examining it for the cameras. "This is a weapon?" he asked. Sensney confirmed it was. The committee learned that approximately 50 such devices had been manufactured and that some had been used operationally, though details of those operations remained classified. The revelation stunned the public. The CIA possessed assassination weapons disguised as everyday objects, weapons that could kill and leave no forensic evidence, weapons designed for use in crowds, weapons like umbrellas. Within hours of the church committee hearing, assassination researchers made the connection. 15 years earlier, on a sunny day in Dallas, a man had stood with an open umbrella as President Kennedy was shot. Was it possible that the umbrella had been a weapon? That Kennedy had been hit not just with bullets, but with a dart carrying a paralyzing agent? Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty was among those who believed it. Prouty had served in the Air Force for 23 years, rising to the position of Chief of Special Operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In 1963, he was responsible for providing military support to CIA clandestine operations. After retiring, he became a vocal critic of the intelligence community and a prominent voice in assassination research. He served as a consultant on Oliver Stone's 1991 film JFK, and was the basis for the mysterious character Mr. X, played by Donald Sutherland. Prouty studied the medical evidence from Kennedy's autopsy and the observations of doctors at Parkland Hospital. He noted several anomalies that troubled him. First, Kennedy's reaction to being shot. The Zapruder film shows that when the first bullet strikes, Kennedy's hands rise to his throat in a stiff, almost mechanical motion. His fists clench. His elbows draw in toward his body. His entire upper body seems to freeze. He makes no attempt to duck, no attempt to protect his wife, no attempt to seek cover. For a man who had served in combat during World War II, who had commanded a PT boat under fire, who knew instinctively what gunfire sounded like, his complete lack of defensive response was bizarre. Second, the wound in Kennedy's throat. Dr. Malcolm Perry, the surgeon who performed the tracheotomy at Parkland Hospital, described the wound as small and neat, measuring 3 to 5 millimeters in diameter. It appeared to be an entrance wound, though the autopsy later concluded otherwise. More puzzling, no bullet was ever recovered that corresponded to that wound. The autopsy reported a bullet passing through Kennedy's neck, but the trajectory was unclear, and the wound characteristics didn't match typical bullet injuries. Third, Kennedy's continued immobility. Even as subsequent shots were fired, Kennedy remained eerily still. He didn't slump to the side. He didn't try to move. Multiple witnesses described him as appearing frozen in place, unable to react. Only when the final shot struck his head did his body move, propelled by the force of the impact. Prouty believed these anomalies pointed to the use of a fast-acting neuromuscular agent delivered via a dart from the umbrella man's weapon. The dart would have struck Kennedy in the throat, penetrated the skin, and released its toxin. Within seconds, Kennedy would have been paralyzed, unable to move or protect himself. With Kennedy immobilized, he became, in the words of another researcher, Robert Cutler, a sitting duck for the snipers positioned around the plaza. The dart, made of plastic that dissolved in body tissue, would have left no trace except the small puncture wound that confused the Parkland doctors. The toxin would have been metabolized or dispersed, undetectable in a standard autopsy. The entire mechanism would have been invisible to investigators who weren't looking for it. It was an elegant theory. It explained the physical evidence. It fit with known CIA capabilities, and it gave the umbrella man a concrete operational role beyond simply signaling. But theories, no matter how elegant, require evidence, and for 15 years the umbrella man remained a ghost, unidentified, unreachable, until 1978. The House Select Committee on Assassinations was created in September 1976 to reinvestigate the murders of President Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. By 1978, the committee was holding public hearings, calling witnesses, and releasing previously suppressed evidence. Among the evidence released were enhanced photographs from Dealey Plaza, including clear images of the umbrella man. The committee appealed to the public for help identifying him. Tips came in. One came from Earl Goltz, an investigative reporter for the Dallas Morning News who had covered the assassination and spent years pursuing leads. Goltz had been contacted by someone who recognized the umbrella man. His name was Louis Stephen Witt. He was 53 years old and worked at a warehouse in the Rio Grande industrial district of Dallas. When contacted by researchers, Witt agreed to come forward. On September 25, 1978, he appeared before the House Select Committee. Witt brought the umbrella with him. It was old, black, worn at the edges. He testified that it was the same umbrella he had carried to Dealey Plaza 15 years earlier. Under questioning, he explained why he had been there. According to Witt, the umbrella was a political protest, but not a protest against President Kennedy himself. It was a protest against Kennedy's father, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., and specifically against the elder Kennedy's support for British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain in the years before World War II. Chamberlain, Witt explained, had been famous for his policy of appeasement toward Adolf Hitler. He had travelled to Munich in 1938, negotiated the agreement that allowed Germany to annex portions of Czechoslovakia, and returned to Britain waving a piece of paper and declaring peace in our time. Chamberlain's trademark accessory was a black umbrella. In the years that followed, the umbrella became a symbol of appeasement, of weakness, of surrendering to tyranny. Joseph Kennedy, while serving as U.S. ambassador to Britain from 1938 to 1940, had been a vocal supporter of Chamberlain's policies. He believed Britain should not go to war with Germany. He argued for negotiation and accommodation. His views made him deeply unpopular in Britain and controversial in the United States, and they ended his political career. Witt testified that he was aware of this history. He described himself as a conservative who disagreed with President Kennedy's policies and wanted to make a symbolic gesture of disapproval. In a conversation with a friend, someone had mentioned that the Chamberlain umbrella was a sore spot with the Kennedy family. Witt thought it would be amusing, in his words, to do a little heckling. So, on the morning of November 22nd, he grabbed the old black umbrella from his house and went to Dealey Plaza. He stood on the curb and, as the president's limousine approached, opened the umbrella and waved it. "I was just going to sort of do a little heckling," Witt said. The committee pressed him. Did the umbrella contain any device, any mechanism, any firing apparatus? "No," Witt said. "It was just an umbrella. An ordinary, worn, cheap umbrella." He opened it for the cameras. It turned inside out, the ribs bending awkwardly. The committee members and audience laughed. Just an umbrella. When asked what he did after the shooting, Witt said he sat down on the curb, shocked. A man sat down next to him, a black man he didn't know. The man said something like, "They done shot them folks." After a few minutes, Witt stood up, folded his umbrella, and walked away. He went home. He didn't think about it again until he saw his photograph in the newspaper decades later. Asked if he had anything to add, Witt said, "If the Guinness Book of World Records had a category for people doing the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong place, I would be number one in that position, without even a close runner-up." The committee thanked him and excused him. The mystery, apparently, was solved. The umbrella man was simply an eccentric protester with spectacularly bad timing. Except many researchers didn't believe him. The problems with Witt's story became apparent almost immediately. John Simkin, a British educator who ran an extensive website dedicated to historical research, investigated Witt's Chamberlain explanation. Simkin consulted British historians and searched contemporary accounts from the 1930s and 1940s. His conclusion: the umbrella was never used as a symbol of appeasement in Britain. Chamberlain simply carried one because he was British, and it often rained in London. There was no symbolic association. Even if some Americans in the 1940s had used umbrellas in anti-appeasement protests, which remains unverified, Witt's story required an extraordinary leap. It asked people to believe that a 15-year-old boy in Texas in 1938 had such strong opinions about British foreign policy that he remembered them vividly 25 years later. That he believed the President of the United States, who had also been young in 1938, would recognize and be offended by this obscure historical symbolism. that he chose November 22nd, 1963 to express this grievance, and that his method of expression was to pump an umbrella up and down at the precise moment the president was shot. The timing was the most troubling element. The Zapruder film and other photographs clearly show Witt raising and pumping the umbrella in a rhythmic, deliberate motion just as the limousine enters the kill zone. That's not the behavior of someone casually holding a prop. That's signaling. Then there was the matter of the dark-complected man, as he was described in House Committee documents. This individual sat down next to Witt immediately after the shooting. In photographs, he appears to be holding something in his hand, possibly a radio or walkie-talkie. His posture is calm, almost professional. He and Witt sit together observing the chaos, then stand and walk away separately. Witt testified he didn't know the man, couldn't identify him, and never spoke to him beyond a brief comment about the shooting. The dark-complected man has never been identified. In 2006, a Cuban newspaper suggested he might be Orlando Bosch Avila, a Cuban exile physician and anti-Castro militant who had worked with CIA-backed operations and was linked to numerous terrorist attacks. But this identification has never been confirmed. To this day, no one knows who the man was, why he sat with Witt, what he was holding, or where he went. Some researchers questioned whether Witt was even the real umbrella man. When the House Committee compared photographs from 1963 with Witt's appearance in 1978, some noted that the facial features and body types didn't match perfectly. Could Witt have been a substitute, someone sent forward to provide an innocent explanation and close the investigation? There's another possibility, darker and more disturbing. Perhaps Witt was telling a version of the truth. Perhaps he did bring an umbrella to Dealey Plaza as a protest. Perhaps he was exactly who he claimed to be, an ordinary citizen with an unusual sense of political theatre. But perhaps someone else noticed him that morning. Perhaps operatives planning the assassination saw a man with an umbrella and realized they could use him. Perhaps they positioned themselves near him. Perhaps they used his umbrella as their signal marker, allowing Witt to be their unwitting accomplice. If that's true, then Witt's testimony was honest but incomplete. He really was just a protester. But his presence was exploited by professionals who understood that the best cover is always something real, something innocent, something that has its own plausible explanation. What we know for certain is this. The Central Intelligence Agency developed and deployed umbrella dart guns in the early 1960s. This is not speculation. It was confirmed under oath before the United States Senate. Charles Sensony described the weapons in detail. Senator Church held one in his hands during televised hearings. Approximately 50 such devices were manufactured. Some were used operationally, though the specifics remain classified. The weapons were designed for assassination in crowds. They were silent, concealable, and left no traceable evidence. The darts delivered toxins that could incapacitate or kill within seconds, then dissolve completely in body tissue, the perfect murder weapon. We know that President Kennedy exhibited unusual physical responses after being shot. His immediate paralysis, his inability to take cover, his stiff posture and clenched fists. All are consistent with neuromuscular incapacitation. Dr. Malcolm Perry and other Parkland Hospital staff noted the strange wound in Kennedy's throat, small and neat, unlike typical bullet wounds they had treated. We know that a man stood in Dealey Plaza on November 22, 1963, holding an open umbrella under a cloudless sky on a 68-degree day. He was the only person in the plaza with an umbrella. He raised it and pumped it in a deliberate motion just as gunfire erupted. He then sat calmly with an unidentified companion while chaos exploded around them. We know that this man, whether Witt or someone else, has never provided an explanation that fully accounts for the timing, the motion, the companion, and the extraordinary coincidence of his presence. And we know that powerful institutions had reason to want Kennedy dead. The CIA was furious over the Bay of Pigs failure and Kennedy's subsequent firing of director Allen Dulles. Military leaders opposed Kennedy's plans to withdraw from Vietnam. The Mafia faced aggressive prosecution under Attorney General Robert Kennedy. Anti-Castro Cuban exiles felt betrayed by Kennedy's refusal to invade Cuba. Lyndon Johnson, facing political destruction from multiple scandals, stood to gain everything from Kennedy's death. If there was a conspiracy, and polls consistently show that the majority of Americans believe there was, then the conspirators needed coordination. They needed someone on the ground to signal the shooters. They needed a marker visible from multiple positions around Dealey Plaza. They needed something unmistakable, an umbrella on a sunny day. In the decades since 1978, the Umbrella Man has remained a fixture in Kennedy assassination research. Books mention him, documentaries feature him. Every few years, a new researcher examines the photographs and proposes a new theory. Some believe Witt's explanation. They accept that he was simply an eccentric protester whose terrible timing created a historical footnote. They point out that not every strange detail in a complex event indicates conspiracy. Sometimes coincidences happen. Sometimes people do inexplicable things. Sometimes the simplest explanation is correct. Others remain convinced that the umbrella was operational, either as a signal device or as a weapon. They note the CIA's confirmed possession of umbrella guns, Kennedy's strange paralysis, the pumping motion, the unidentified companion, and the timing. They argue that the weight of circumstantial evidence points to something more than coincidence. Still others suggest middle ground, that Witt was genuine but unwittingly exploited, that he provided cover for professionals who used his presence for their own purposes. The truth, whatever it is, rests with the man who stood on Elm Street that day. If it was Louis Stephen Witt, he maintained his story until his death on November 17, 2014, at age 88. He never recanted. He never elaborated. He remained adamant that the umbrella was simply a protest, nothing more. But certainty is elusive. The Umbrella Man is a Rorschach test, as many researchers have noted. What you see in him depends on what you believe about the assassination itself. If you accept the Warren Commission's conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, then the Umbrella Man is an unfortunate oddity, a man whose bizarre behavior coincidentally occurred at the worst possible moment. If you believe Kennedy was killed by a conspiracy, then the Umbrella Man is evidence, perhaps even proof, of coordination and planning. Both narratives can't be true. Yet both rest on the same photographic evidence, the same testimony, the same historical record. November 22, 1963, 12:30 p.m. Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas. Temperature 68 degrees. Sky clear. No clouds. No rain. A man stands on the north side of Elm Street, 30 feet from the presidential limousine's path. He holds an open black umbrella. As the limousine approaches, he raises the umbrella higher and pumps it, up and down, once, twice. Shots ring out. President Kennedy clutches his throat. His head explodes. The limousine accelerates. People scream. The man with the umbrella sits down on the curb. Minutes pass. The plaza empties. Police search buildings. Ambulances arrive. The man with the umbrella folds it closed, stands, and walks away. For 15 years, no one knows his name. When he finally comes forward, his explanation raises more questions than it answers. Decades pass. Researchers debate. The photographs remain. The film continues to run, frame after frame, showing the umbrella rising, pumping, marking the moment when history changed. Was it a signal? A weapon? A protest? A coincidence? The Umbrella Man knows. And whether his name was Louis Stephen Witt or something else, whether he was innocent or complicit, whether he acted alone or as part of something larger, he carried the answer with him into silence. The umbrella remains, folded and stored somewhere, or perhaps discarded years ago, or perhaps kept as a souvenir of the day when a man did the wrong thing in the wrong place at the wrong time. or exactly the right thing, in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time, depending on who you ask. The truth, like so much about November 22nd, 1963, remains just out of reach, visible but untouchable, like a man standing under an umbrella on a sunny day, waiting for the rain that never comes.